Hello and welcome to the Black Cat Bushcraft channel. Today I'm going to be talking about something that's quite a bit different for me, and that is the William Collins survival knife. Well, first off, if you watch my channel often, you know that I'm not a survival knife type of guy. I generally am carrying a traditional bushcrafting style knife. For example, what I have on my hip at the moment is a 4-inch blade by 1 inch from spine to blade, and generally 1/8 of an inch thick, so more of a slim profile knife, and 90% of the time it's a Scandi grind knife. That's what I like using. And this particular one is actually a William Collins, which I'm carrying on my hip right now, the Woodsman's Classic. Excellent knife. However, when Blackie Thomas contacted me back in the summer, I was excited that he asked me to test out the knife, to use it and give my thoughts on it and even a review on it. Blackie Thomas is one of my favorite YouTubers. He has an excellent channel. If you're not subscribed, I highly recommend that you do. You'll learn a lot from him. And he's a super nice guy. And so when he asked me to take a look at this knife, which he helped to inspire, collaborating with William Collins, I was excited to do just that. And I know that anytime you use a tool that you're not comfortable with, you're apt to learn something. And I think through the process of using this knife over the last several months, I have indeed learned something about it. And I feel a lot more proficient with it today than I did when I first got it. And I'm sure that there's a lot more that this knife can do than I'll even demonstrate. But after using it off and on for the last several months, I thought I would share with you some basic tests, some things that I've kind of used the knife for and what it does well for me, and just kind of share that in case you're interested in a knife. I do want to say that this video is not to try to sell this knife, not to endorse this knife. I gladly endorse William Collins and his work. Everything I've ever held of his was top notch, including this knife. The workmanship of it is fabulous. However, it's really not the type of thing that I tend to use. But again, after using it, I have a great appreciation of it. When I first saw the profile of this blade, I thought, man, that is something I totally don't understand completely because it's not what I'm used to. But nonetheless, after using it, I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised by what it's capable of. But again, just to say, this is not me trying to sell this knife or telling you that you need it, but it's just me giving my thoughts on it, being a bushcraft type guy and what it did for me while I was using it. So stay tuned. Let's put the knife through a few paces, see how it does, and then I'll come back and give you my final thoughts. Let's just do a little light batoning work with the knife. And being a 3/16 of an inch thick piece of steel, I'm sure that it'll do a good job of wedging this wood apart. One of the things I noticed that with this little point right here, when you go to baton, it gives you a nice little starting point. Just kind of prop that point right there. It kind of bites into the wood, and it makes it really easy to get set up for batoning. This is an example of one of those tasks that a knife like this can really excel at. And it's one that you can do with basically any strong bushcraft knife, but one I prefer not to if I can avoid it. But with a knife like this, no problem. So let's take down this tree, which is at least 2.5 inches in diameter with just the knife. So any knife that's labeled as a survival knife should be excellent in assisting you in making a natural shelter. And to do that, we're going to need to harvest some saplings. I'm simply going to insert my pinky into this lanyard, and I'm going to choke back on the handle of the knife. And you can see this handle is excellent for that. And just to start with, I'm going to take off just the limbs that are in my way. And this knife absolutely excels at that. Cleans things up really quick. And now I'm going to use this point right here and use that leverage that I've got from the pinky lanyard to easily take down that probably 1.5 to 2 inch sapling. So the question becomes, is this the best tool suited to this job? And the answer would have to be no, because an axe is a more powerful cutting tool and a saw would be more efficient. But if this is the tool that you have, it is very capable of the task. Anytime I'm testing out a new knife, one of my favorite things to do is to carve a few feather sticks. And I know that that's overdone on YouTube, but it gives me a good feel for how a knife does where it comes to fine carving tasks and what kind of control that I have with the knife in my hand. And one thing I have to say about this knife and all of the knives that I've held made by William Collins is that that Coke bottle grip that he uses is just fantastic, and it just really worked for me. Fits my hand well. And when I'm carving feather sticks on this knife, this area right here and into this sweet spot curve really excels for me. And it just, the angle that the blade contacts the material just does a really nice job of slicing. And even being a 3/16 of an inch thick blade, you can make these really fine curls, as you can see here. And part of that, I think, is that secondary bevel on the blade allows you to do that. But it's big, and you know, as heavy as the knife is, it really can excel at these little fine bushcrafting type tasks. It's not its specialty, but again, it's capable. And I think that's really the intent of this knife, is to be able to do many different tasks and be capable. And that little curve there just really makes this easy and a joy to do. You can tell I enjoy making feather sticks, but you can see what I'm getting there. One of my favorite tools to use in the woods is a small hand axe, because I can use it for rough cutting of things that I'm going to use in my camp and therefore save the fine edge of my knife. This area right here on this knife, this straight edge, works very much so like a small hand axe, and that's because you have it forward on the blade, so it's got that weight behind it and it does a nice job of chopping. Let's use this knife to rough out a point for a tent stake. Because of the weight of that blade, I don't have to really put any effort into it. And because of the ergonomics of the handle, I have very good control. So it does a really nice job of projects like that. All right, let's carve the notch on the stake as well. For that, I'm just going to use my baton to make a nice little stop cut right there. Now, carve right in, making that number 7 notch. And by using this, now I can save those finer edges on the knife, which I use for the finer tasks. Now I just bevel this off a little bit. That'll prevent my stake from breaking out. Crown it off just a little bit using the finer area of the blade. And that's it. So the knife made that a very easy task to complete. Another thing that's very important for me with the knife is being able to do chest lever cuts for safety, and also to be able to remove lots of material fast. And again, this is where that little sweet spot curve really excels, because I can dig down, and because of the angle, the way the wood slides across that blade, it does a nice job of cutting into the material. And again, with Williams handle, that feels very comfortable. However, there is a lot of weight to this blade, so it's a little bit of work holding it in this way just because of the weight. But again, it's not a big issue at all. But this is an important way to be able to use the knife for me, and with that curve, it really excels in this way. Another thing that I've seen people doing is choking up on the blade like this to use the knife to make draw cuts. And it absolutely does work for that. And because of the height of the blade from the blade itself to the spine of the knife, you can get a very comfortable and safe grip on the knife. If you were debarking a stick or something like that, this is the way you could do it. And you can make very fine, subtle cuts using the knife like this for finishing off things like spoons or chopsticks or anything that you were carving in your camp. This works well as a improvised draw knife. The other way I've seen people doing this is using that little fine tanto tip. And so what they'll do is make the little fine detail work with that. And it actually is quite comfortable doing that. And I feel quite safe with the thumb joint coming into my body. And again, with that curve, that little belly there into that curve, I feel like I can make really nice little detailed cuts if I want to. And right now, obviously, I'm not carving anything particular, just testing the knife's cutting ability and how it feels using it in this way. But I think with a little practice, somebody could become quite proficient using this knife in this way. It's quite comfortable. Yeah, I can definitely see using that little tanto tip this way. So all of these different curves, they do function as they're intended to, and they may not come instinctively to a beginner, but once you use this knife a little bit, and the more you use it, the more comfortable you start getting with these different areas of the blade, with these different curves, so forth. You find yourself becoming proficient with it fairly quickly. So I'm using this little thumb rest right here on the back of the blade to process down dry bark from this tulip poplar limb. And it actually fits right on the limb and does a great job of removing that dry inner bark to make those tinder bundles and bird's nests that we need to get our fire started. So this is actually very easy, makes the process very quick and simple. And I really like that area of the blade for this purpose. You can see what I'm getting there. All really good stuff. And very simple to do with that little thumb rest. As with any knife with a good 90-degree spine, you can throw sparks from a ferro rod, and it does that well. So one other part of this blade that I think is quite interesting is the tip. And the tip is very much so in line with the handle, like a traditional spear point. And this thing is very robust. It's reinforced, and I'll give you a close-up of it. But I'm curious to how well it would be as a penetrating tool. And this is not my knife, so I'm not going to get so rough with it. I'm driving it through a couple of inches here of pine, and the tip just came through. You can see the tip is just coming through right here. And into my stump. So yeah, this thing definitely can penetrate through things. Obviously that's not a severe test driving it into a piece of pine, but I've seen videos of where William was actually driving these things into concrete blocks. So this tip is pretty impressive. Now a lot of times people think of a tip like this, a tanto tip, as a fighting type knife, but that's not my impression of this knife at all. And I wouldn't even begin to call it a fighting knife any more than a steak knife or any other type of knife. I don't think that's its specialty, but obviously as a tan-toe tip with a nice point, it could pierce things, and I'm sure things much more extreme than what I've demonstrated here. There's a little point right here on the back of this blade. It's pretty subtle, but I think it would be good for things like cracking open these acorns, or if you had like black walnuts, pecans, things like that, you use this to hammer into them. Now these acorns are long past their prime, but just as a way to test cracking into them, this will make a good tool for that. And in my area, a lot of times we have pecans, depending on where you're from. We have a lot of black walnuts too, and those things can be a little aggravating to get into, and having a good tool like this is very nice to be able to crack into it. So obviously, again, these are far gone, but just as a way to test out the back of this blade, I think it does a really nice job. Just one other thing to think about here with this edge geometry on the back of the knife is this thing would excel excellently as a butcher knife. And I don't have any animals right now to skin, but once you stick that tip down up under that skin, you could open an animal right up with that. You can see how it rides right here on this hump, just like a butcher knife would, and prevent this spear point from getting caught in the meat. So you could get right up under that skin with that fine point and then open the animal right up. So that's one thing that I can tell by looking at the geometry of this knife, that it was absolutely intended to be able to skin and process game. One of the things that intimidated me most about this knife when I first saw the pictures of it was, with all these different surfaces on the blade, I assumed it would be very difficult to sharpen or even to strop it, which I often do with my knives in the field. But after handling the knife, I've come to find out that this secondary bevel here is the exact same angle from the tip all the way back to the handle. So it's very easy, actually, in the case to strop it, which is all I've done with the knife. I've not put it on a stone as it doesn't belong to me. But once I mate the knife to the strop, I can trace that bevel all the way down to the tip, maintaining the angle. And it's no problem to strop this right through all those curves. What I have found is that this area from here to here is the part of the knife that I use most naturally. And so sometimes I'll give that a little special attention and just make sure that that area is razor sharp, as that's what I tend to wear on the most when I'm using a knife in the field. But again, to sharpen the entire blade or to strop and maintain the entire blade is really a lot easier than you would initially think just by looking at it. And with all this geometry going on, it really is not a difficult task at all. One thing I will say about this knife is it's a very unique tool. And if you look at the edge, you can tell it's got a lot going on with the different curves and different points to the belly of the blade. And with that said, it does take a little practice to get used to the knife and learn how to use each of those subtle points to the best of their ability. With a little practice for me, I started to figure a lot of different ways to use that blade, different grips and angles to hold it at to get the best results with it. With that said, I don't necessarily know that this is the best knife for a beginner, but somebody who has a little experience or someone who's willing to put a little time in using the tool can come to understand it and learn to maximize its potential. Alright, so that's just a few of the tasks that I felt comfortable to demonstrate for you with the knife based on my experience with it. I'm sure that this knife has a lot of other applications and is capable of a lot of other things that I haven't demonstrated, but I wanted to stick within the realm of the Black Hat Bushcraft channel for my review and just show you the types of things that you see me actually doing out here. I know that this knife would have an application in an urban setting as well, but again, that's outside the niche of what I do here on the Black Hat Bushcraft channel. I'm sure that there's other videos out there and other reviews that can show those different aspects of what this knife is capable of. Again, this is not me trying to sell this knife or telling you that it's the knife that you need. It may very well be exactly what you're looking for. Then again, it might be totally not of interest to you, in which case maybe you're not even watching the video at this point. But nonetheless, I did want to show the knife and just kind of give my feedback, my perspective of it. With William Collins knives, it's not something you can go down to your local knife store and pull out of the cabinet and just handle and get a feel for. It's something that you watch reviews on, you see pictures of, and then you order it based off of that. So I hope that this is just one more video to show and to share one person's thoughts on the knife. Maybe it'll be good feedback even for William. again, I fully endorse William as a knife maker. In my opinion, he's one of the best out there, and I own a couple of his knives that I personally bought, and they're fantastic. I have no complaints. Again, that's what I have on my hip right now and have been carrying now for the last about month, which this is a newer knife for me. But nonetheless, I just wanted to share this. I hope that this gives you some valuable information. If you are interested in the WCSK, go and check out William's website, which is wcknives.com, and get more information about him and his products. Again, thank you, Blackie Thomas, for allowing me to review this knife. And if you haven't checked him out, again, Blackie Thomas. I'll put some links down in the description below. I want to thank you guys for your time and interest. I appreciate the support, and I hope to be back with you with another video again very soon. And until the next one, take care and God bless.